Welcome back, everyone, to the European VC podcast. Today, I have another episode for you that dives deep on deep work, the self-work, the tough work where you're dealing with the trauma that you have in life, be that stuff you're building up right now or stuff that you have from your background and childhood. I'm joined by Mike Weiner from 432 Legacy, who we're doing these retreats with. And of course, this session dives fully into Rupda's work and the way both her background and how she came to do this work, and then everything around how she works with founders and VCs and executives around the self-work. It is the most honest conversation. You can really, in this conversation, feel why Rupda is such an incredible guide to have with you on a journey like this. So I really hope you'll listen and tune into this episode because it is incredibly important work for anyone in the ecosystem. I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I did making it.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Mike and Rupda, welcome back to the European VC podcast.
Good to see you.
Hi.
Once again, but this time in a bit of a different format because the last time I spoke a bit, but this time I'll lean much more back and let you, Mike, take the lead and really dive deep with Rupda, because you've worked with Rupda for a long time. You have her involved in the work you do with founders as well, and of course also with the deep dive retreats we're doing. And you are much further on the path of self-development than I am. So I'm really just leaning back here and enjoying this show. And then I'll add in questions along the way when there's something that I cannot keep myself from asking.
Yeah, definitely jump in. I think the last time the four of us talked about the retreat, I think we missed a bit on the background of Rupda and just to go deeper into this, which is why we said, let's do the follow-up together. Before we start, maybe just setting the stage, because I would really love to hear more from Rupda. But I think what really got us into the work are the benefits, right? I mean, to your point, Andreas, I've been working with Rupda for a long time, but I think it's good to set the stage as to like, how do I feel now? And what are the key benefits? Because it's really around having more energy, feeling more connected, feeling more gratitude, more focus and overall also more purpose. And to start setting the stage with this, I think it's important for people like, why should I care? Right? Why should I care about the work if you feel you don't have any problems? And we're going to go into this in depth, and I'm glad we have the time now to really talk for almost an hour. So Rupda, let's just really go a bit more into your background, because I love your story and how you got into this work. So tell us a bit more about you, how you grew up and what got you into the work.
Hi, thanks, Mike, and also Andreas for having us back on. I love our last talk. I just felt it went way beyond where I thought we were going to go. And I love that, the openness and the unknown. The entry into this work was really, of course, by personal experience. And we don't enter, of course, into trauma work, I think, naturally, unless there's a direct experience there. I've come to find out, by the way, that we all have different layers of what trauma really is in growing up in our environment. Everyone has different degrees of it. So the understanding around trauma itself is starting to get updated in people's, understanding in their brain. What is trauma by definition? Mine is very extreme because when I was born, I was given away at birth, and that already in that moment was in a way, when a baby's nervous system is pulled away from the mother's nervous system, there's no regulatory to go to, because they put the baby immediately on the mother's chest and the baby can start to regulate. But already from conception, she was homeless and living on the streets. So her nervous system was very rattled and dysregulated. And so she wasn't able to have this baby as a homeless teenage girl. And the baby was given away for 9 months until she was able to come back and get me. And when she did, she took a decision months later to go to London. And I think that was another impact moment for her. I think it was about a year and a half then, where she had a nervous breakdown in the snow on the streets of London. Her money was stolen, all her money, and her passport. And then the baby, myself, at 1.5, was taken away for another 6 months. I don't really have a recollection of these two moments of being taken away. But if you work somatically, of course, it's in the nervous system. And that's why sometimes I don't even know or need to know the story of an individual's, upbringing. I can work through the body. But the one that, of course, I did remember was when I was 5 and I was taken away. My mum left me at boarding school in Oxford, and I was there for a couple of years. And that was the one I really remember. That's the full kind of visual and also somatic reaction that I had watching her driving away. And of course, that also set me up with many imprints of beliefs that I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, and damaged goods. So the first 7 years were so heavily sort of traumatizing, if I'm really honest. I didn't talk. Yeah, I often speak about that. I didn't really even share this until recently, until the last year, that I actually didn't speak for the first 7 years because there was so much shame around the fact that I didn't speak. And now, as a trauma therapist, and the more I work with helping people to sort of open up these layers of shame as well, I find myself really exposing this area of my life where I've kind of kept in sort of privacy. But I see the value in it. Now, I sometimes share in my work, you don't have to have the big trauma, upbringing. You could have a missing parent, a missing, a connection, a feeling of someone not being present for you. You can have someone not validating you, assuring you, making you feel safe, holding you, giving contact, saying, I love you. If these things are not there, that also can be traumatizing for a little kid and can set them up into all sorts of personalities and how they get love. Yeah, we can talk more about that later. But what I try to let people know in the retreats and the trainings is that, if I can get through heavy trauma and come to this place of relaxation and regulation and stabilization, then you can too. That's what I'm hoping to impart when I share that stories. That doesn't matter what degree of trauma, there's still possibilities. Yeah, the door's not completely closed.
What I think is also, I think, very unique about your upbringing is you grew up in a community, that you already grew up as a young child meditating for hours every day. Back in the days, mindfulness wasn't really a thing, right? And now many people talk about meditation, mindfulness, obviously something popular. But maybe also touch base on that a bit, because I think not only do you speak from experience, obviously, but also you have a very unique background that gave you a lot of different tools as well. Love for you to elaborate there a bit.
What I really truly believe was a pivotal moment was when I was 7, and I was in the mid-70s, and my mother did take me to that Tibetan Buddhist commune up in Scotland called Semi-Ling. It still exists to this day. And having those monks who are Tibetan, who didn't speak any English, I was nonverbal, they were nonverbal. It was a perfect storm for, establishing a connection that I didn't have in the boarding school. Everybody was twice my age, and I was, in kind of many different violent situations that happened to me. And the extreme of contrast of being in this monastery, this Tibetan monastery, was feeling held, feeling compassion, feeling safe. That was really important to establish so early on, in contrast. And the meditation was a big support in that, because it helped me immediately to develop a foundational place inside myself in this sort of fearful, anxious kid that was shut down, withdrawn to the world, to start finding ways to kind of regulate. I didn't know that's what I was doing, but that is what I was doing. And I didn't know that all these Tibetan Buddhists were showing me love in action. And that was a game changer for me, because it really saved my life. And I could have been on the street homeless as well, with the kind of level of shock and trauma I experienced.
So maybe then let's go into, I think, effects that we see in society, high stress, and that we experience, especially in this industry, with founders working long hours, investors as well. So we talk about anxiety, and we talk about loneliness, we talk about even extremes like burnout, depression. So there's so many effects here that we see in society. I'd like to start right there. How do you work with it? What do you see, and where do you start?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's prevalent. It's everywhere. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to travel the last decades in many different countries, many different continents, culturally seeing it showing up everywhere. So it doesn't really matter where you are, especially if you're in the Western adapted kind of mind where you're in the work. Obviously, if you're living in the Amazon, it's a different thing. And the high functioning, high stress, and the burnouts and the overwhelms, and it's prevalent, definitely prevalent. And then I just to speak a bit to that, the irony is when I get some of these sort of, I have been working with CEOs over the last decade or so in different touch points where they come and get one-on-one sessions with me, and they have depression and they have isolation. They have, thoughts about low self-esteem, unworthiness, and what's the whole point? What am I doing? They get to very dark places in themselves, and they're at the top of that, supposedly big heap where everyone is trying to go, which is the big bank account and the big job and the big house and, all of the bigness of what it is perceived is going to give us that happiness, and they're feeling depressed or suicidal. It really is a testament to it's not out there, and I do understand that people really want to make good impact in the work that they do and make a difference in the corporations and the companies and the organizations and different businesses. It absolutely matters. If that is at the expense of disconnect to yourself, you're going to feel lonely or isolated or depressed or burnt out along the way. So to do that differently means that you need to include self. And many people since childhood have not learned how to include self because what they've done in order to get love, recognition, to be seen, to be heard, to, look competent or the winner or the achiever, is to abandon aspects of themselves, which is parts that were not loved or recognized or rejected. And then they kind of adapt into this false self of how they need to achieve. And then by doing so, they separate from parts of themselves. And then they go out there and they go, look at me, look what this amazing job I got, amazing car I got, look what who I'm working with, which is great. It's all great. But if that becomes your identity, that outer identity, and it's not connected to the truth of who you are, you will feel the pain of that separation. And no wonder then we have, extreme in isolation and depression, especially in men. Yeah. And then the other side of that is the disconnection also creates a disconnection to the body. And when I say to the body, it doesn't matter if you're doing extreme sports and going to the gym every day. It's just knowing how we overwhelm and overrun our own bodies to the point that we get burnout. So a big key in some of this is awareness, self-awareness, and including ourselves, inclusivity. Yeah, happy to speak more to that. But does that kind of give you a sense of how people end up in this situation?
I think what's interesting is so for instance, I feel that oftentimes people don't even know how disconnected they are. And I give you an example because I experienced it myself. So what I would say is that I've had for a very long time, I've had a poor relationship with anger. I always saw anger as something negative, right? Something which I didn't feel much. And also in working with you and others, I really got more in touch with that energy. And what I noticed is how much life energy comes from that place. So anger is obviously something that can be expressed in bad ways, but it has extremely powerful effects like boundaries, just feeling that energy in your body. It's like, no, this is a clarity, you know, a clear yes, a clear no. And the problem with, let's call it numbness in society, is actually quite profound. And I don't think many people realize how numb they've become. So I talk from my own experience, because looking back, I realize now how I've been distracting myself with work, how I've been, or like phone, podcast, you know, and that all serves a purpose. But at the same time, like, you know, the level of energy I feel now is fundamentally higher. The level of connectiveness and yeah, gratitude and all of this, it comes from a place that energy is flowing more freely in the body. So I would love to hear you talk a bit more about numbness in particular, because a burnout is already an extreme case where people know, okay, they've clearly gone too far, you know, and if you're really in depression, you know, clearly you've gone too far. So they know they have to start doing something, right? I think the real question is, you're not there yet, but where you're somewhere, you're disconnected and you don't even realize you're disconnected. And I feel that's a big part of the audience, and me included, where I think it's a massive benefit to talk a bit more around signals there and yeah, and your
Yeah,
experience.
absolutely. You know, I want to just give a little bit of a starting point of how that comes to be. And classic is growing up in England, you know, you're taught very, very early on as a little child not to be too much. And you learn how to turn off your emotions. And I often use the analogy of the little kids, 2 years old, playing in the sandpit together. You see them in their full expression of their emotions. And then over time, they are told to quiet down or to pipe down or to slow down or to keep everything down, and including feelings, especially ones that are not sociably acceptable. And I understand we don't want to walk around just screaming at everyone. But what then happens is we start to reject those feelings ourselves, and we start to deny them, and we start to not allow any space for them. And that becomes very painful because we split off from those feelings, but we're not always aware of it because we want the approval of mom, dad, or the school system. We want that kind of, we're a good girl, good boy, or we rebel, yeah, and then shut down differently. You know, that's the other extreme. But by shutting down our feelings, you know, we kind of learn to navigate strategy in our head and less orientated towards our hearts and what we feel. And the pain of feeling also, that disconnect, is too excruciating for some people. So they also split off from that. And now imagine if a kid has a depressed mom or an alcoholic dad, or something's out of control in their environment, and the pain of that is too much for them to bear. So then now they learn another way of splitting off from those feelings, right? So it becomes a learned behavior. And then if they see their parents numbing out in different ways, whether it's through, you know, alcohol or workaholism and so on, there are many different ways people numb out. Now, sadly, today you see parents walking with kids and they're on their phone and they're not really with their kid, you know, so the kid is already learning that behavior of disconnect, you know. So they learn how to, we all have learned how to kind of pipe down and hold back our emotions. And then through conditioning, meaning the environment you grew up in, the school system, the home, you know, maybe religious temples, whatever it is, you learn more and more what's okay, what's not okay. Because our need to belong is so strong, we compartmentalize our feelings, but we do it so much so that we forget to even sometimes allow ourselves to feel, even vulnerability of tears. I just had a client yesterday on a one-on-one, and he hadn't cried in 10 years. And that's just shocking to me. But because remember, tears are natural. They're natural to our humanness, but they're also a natural release in the nervous system. So they're not wrong, but we got the information early on that it's wrong. And I can't tell you how many times you see parents saying, stop crying. And it happened a lot generations ago, but it still happens today. So if you then switch off that whole thing, you start to numb out from feelings. Now, this person I was talking to yesterday, he's a founder, and he's founded 2 very, very successful companies. But because he's switched off from his feelings and he can't feel tears, he can't feel when his girlfriend's crying, he can't hold space for her even because he can't connect to them in himself. But also he can't feel the joy of his success. So he can't feel the fulfillment and the contentment of, wow, how beautiful this bed of garden that I've created, because he's switched off from feelings. So you don't only switch off from the bad ones now, you're switching off from the good ones. So that deeper love and connection and trust starts to become a faraway, distant, concept, and not something that people have embodied. So it was a strategy, is in essence, in how to survive in an environment that was saying it was not okay to be too much.
Yeah. And I feel a lot of, I would say, founders, investors will read a lot of books trying to help themselves, right? I mean, we're great at that, but it's a very limited approach, right? And it's so different than like really doing the work, and especially working with the body somatically, and working with you, Rupda. So I think what is amazing about you is that you've been doing this now for what more than 30 or 40 years even, right? And really the group work, and using various different tools also in the way you do this, because you work somatically, you work with the body, but you also do blend of constellation work and all kinds of techniques that I find very unique. So maybe you can talk a bit more about a few of those techniques before you go a bit deeper also into the open work and other areas, because tell us a bit more about somatic work. Why is it important? When I see work, you're so switched on, you'll see like, hey, the shoulder of that person is tense, right? The leg is shaking. You notice the tiniest details. Tell me a bit more. Why does that matter? What do you pay attention to? How do you do this work?
Absolutely. I know I've said this a multitude of times, but it's really important to get the essence of how I work. I was in a conference in Mexico City a few months ago. It was all practitioners and doctors. And I said to them, I work through the 4 centers of intelligence: the head, the heart, the belly, and there's a 4th one, which is I refer to as the unknown, which is constantly informing us. Yeah? And I said, I'm standing here in front of you all now, and I first have to work through the head center to get your agreement and your awareness and your understanding. Otherwise, I get your resistance, and I get what the bleep is this person talking about? So first, I have to go through the intelligence of that head center, which is it has its place. Obviously, it's where most of the Western culture has focused its time and energy on. And then I drop into the belly center, which is for the body, and I do that because that's relatable to people. Even if they can't feel and they've been numb for years, at least we can say we have a body. And I can even put my hand up and say, who here carries tension? And, mostly 90% of the room will say yes. And then there's something relatable for them. And where they carry the tension, is important, because the body holds. The body holds so much through the stresses of the day. And it's carrying that. Through that, I'm able to give people an understanding that even if you minimize your stressors, or you minimize your triggers and activations or your traumas, it's going to show up in the body. So if you think you're fine and dandy, if the body is, giving you symptoms, or you're having a hard time sleeping at night, or you feel disassociated or disconnected, or hard time slowing down and being still and present when your partner's looking at you, and you're impatient, you're losing your cool, your temper, I would say, hello. We've got something to work here with, because through the body, we also release. Even though we hold in the body, the good news is we release through the body. And then if I can get you to come into the body, then now we're getting closer to the heart center, the intelligence of the heart, which is the big transformer. It works beautifully in cohesion with the unknown, which is the biggest one. Huh? But for people who have spent years of numbness, I'll take the person I gave a one-on-one yesterday with, the founder. He asked me, how do I get out of this numbness, So I propositioned him in the very process that you guys have done, the deep dive retreat. And I told him that if you were to sit in a circle with people sharing and opening about their feelings, it's going to touch something in you. 9 times out of 10, unless you're on the spectrum, then then we're going into another zone. And I want to give deep respect to people who have Asperger's and on the spectrum, because the way that they do feelings is another set of parameters that I would work with. Yeah. But to speak to the general masses, when you sit in a circle and you hear what people are sharing, they start to open and they start to dare to go to places, and they start to open and feelings start to come. If you're one of those people sitting there in that numbness, resonance happens. That's what the heart does. It creates resonance, it creates empathy, it creates compassion. And the mind starts to get activated, and even to the point that it can say, I want some of that. I want to feel that. It can get excited and go, wow, I want that experience. It can get inspired, turned on. And that's why I find that doing group therapy work, which is what I was raised in the last 48 years, is more powerful than anything. Because yes, I do one-on-one therapy. I have a big respect for that. And actually not everybody is ready for group therapy. And those that are, I have seen in transformation in such short time, than I have when I hold them in a one-on-one. Yeah.
Can I ask you, Rupda, about an experience at the retreat we did in September? Because I'm trying here, I'm thinking many of us are a bit less understanding of what the body, what does it mean to get inside your body, what is actually happening, what is a disconnection between the mind and the feelings and what we have in our bodies. Even having been there myself, I would say I didn't feel that much in the body in terms of the body releasing. I did, but to be clear, not as much as, because I wanted to bring this situation up where we have an individual that is really facing trouble in sharing openly, but who you then recognize what this person needs is to let the body talk, and then you go over and assist the person, and then you see this incredibly powerful physical release and shaking of the body that I've never seen in my life. I'm sure I speak for the whole group. We've never seen anything like that. It was, as powerful as any shamanistic ritual you would imagine in a Hollywood movie. And it was playing out there right in front of us. And it was so powerful for the person and for everyone there. And that, and when I say I didn't feel much in the body, it's by way of that. It was in no way to that level for me, but I could definitely recognize all of this in me as well happening, but just to a lesser degree. Could you talk a bit about this? What is it that happens here where the body overrides what your mind can do, so to say?
I want to say that the release, when the body does a release, we call it an involuntary movement in the trauma work. And if we give it the right conditions and the right environment, and of course the right holding, which is what we do in the deep dive retreat, so that the body can feel safe, you can feel safe to go to that place. And then if I'm working with you, I can work with access points, and working through the body. And sometimes it's a question that will activate or trigger something that will take the body into a movement. And it then all of a sudden starts to do a release. And the release can look like the body shaking. It can look like all of a sudden an outburst of laughter or tears. It's completely, unknown in how the body will start to do its release. And this, if you're not a trauma therapist, will be kind of a shock to the brain, because you're like, what is going on here? But the intelligence of the body, when given that right environment, can do repair. And as a trauma therapist, that is, of course, I'm more than a trauma therapist because I've done years of this group therapy work. and I do other bodies of work that I bring into this. But that piece in helping people to work through the body, the cognitive mind doesn't fully understand, but the intelligence of the body knows exactly what to do. It knows when to yawn when it needs oxygen. Yeah, it knows when to, stretch when it needs to do a stretch. It knows how to give you signals and signs for what it needs next. It knows how to tell you when it's hungry, and it also knows how to release. When we give it the conditions, and sadly, because we're so uptight and contracted and restricted and tense, and because of work and little or no space for our bodies to actually have this rest and release. Actually, I always say it the other way around, release and rest, because that's what starts to happen to the body after the parasympathetic comes up, and then, after a big release. So the good news is what you've just shared, Andreas, is that you don't actually have to know how to do it, because the body knows how to do it. You, of course, ideally want to work with someone that can support you in going there. And then because we take this into a group setting, in this case with a deep dive, you can be sitting, observing someone, witnessing someone, and intellectually might not understand what the bleep is going on, but you have resonance, your body has resonance going, wow, I relate to this. I'm holding this. And that's the power of the group dynamics. That's when it does more than just a therapist suggesting something, when you see it in real time in action in front of you. So the body wisdom is profound. And with the right therapist, they will give space and time for that body, let's say in this case, to shake without stopping it, knowing that there's a repair happening. Yeah? And with the right guidance, they can really bring it into completion. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just to double click, because indeed with the trauma work, I wanted to go a bit deeper there of like what's happening and why it's so important, because there is actually many, and I think maybe you should speak to specific situations where we think we can solve everything here. But the problem is that, like, even if you want to change something in your life, like change a habit, right? It's extremely powerful to let the body experience it first, to then initiate that change. It's just one example. Like Andreas mentioned the example of a full-on like trauma release, where it's a lot of tension and things leaving your body, which can relate to childhood trauma, can relate to something else entirely, or just tension related to rejection that's been building up for 10 years or whatever it is. You do not even have to rationally understand it. The point is, after a release like this, you feel this lightness, a lot of anxiety or tension or other emotions that you didn't get out of before suddenly are gone, right? So something that you may have wanted to solve with a therapist or reading books or trying to figure out here may suddenly just be gone, and you have a different access point to initiate change. And I think that's why I want to go a bit deeper there. Also, when you work with people, you give them those somatic experiences, essentially what you're doing is you're giving them the chance not only to release, right, but to really change a habit, to really overcome a trauma, which can be a small one or a big one. So to zoom a bit deeper into the why this is so powerful, because to Andreas' point, I think for the audience and for us, it's still something a bit of abstract, that we're looking at. It's like, and the mind wants to understand. And I think the whole point is that it's not about understanding this, right? It is around accepting the science behind why this is so important to actually address the somatic system in the body and how this can bypass. And, they say it's like 10 years of therapy potentially, or multiple years of therapy that you can have within 4 days working with the somatic system, right? So that just to double click a bit more on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that when I'm working, especially with founders and VCs, because they take on such long work hours and such big kind of stressors of what they're holding, that there's a lot of tension in their body. Even if they go to the gym and they do a lot of sports, sometimes they're more tense than someone who is actually just, not doing all of that extreme sports. And I want to speak to that because Sometimes it feels like a discharge for them because they're holding so much to go out there and ride a bicycle or pump weights or do whatever it is, just so that they can kind of come back to the body. And sometimes they're pushing the body in a different direction, which isn't really allowing the body to rest and relax. So I can give you a kind of an extreme example of where that would show up for an indicator, which is a very obvious one, is during intimacy. So if you're a man or a woman and you're having intimacy and you're not able to be present, and you're in the performance mode, or you're in the action mode, and you're in the let's get it over with mode, and you're in the, we only have so much time, whatever, and you're not actually like you were on the first date, maybe when you're really in that honeymoon phase and everything feels like it's slowed down and you're connected. If you're not in that, that's an indicator that your body is not present, but also you are not present. You start to disassociate, disconnect, and especially if you have any, and we didn't even touch on this, any kind of verbal abuse and psychological abuse, emotional abuse, and of course physical and sexual abuse, then you're not able to be present. Now, this is a big indicator during intimacy, but we don't only have to look at it during intimacy. We can look at it where you're in meetings or where you're in interactions with people and you lose patience, you lose your temper, you lose your cool, you're unable to kind of hold focus for a period of time, you get distracted, or your communication style is either aggressive or shut down or passive. What starts to happen when we start to do the body-oriented work, which means helping us come into presence, helping us to be here now, but also through the body being able to release some of the charge that we have. Some of us are walking around wanting to punch somebody, there's so much anger and temperament in the person, and to be able to discharge through the body some of that tension we hold in our neck, in our jaws, in our shoulders, in our belly, in our solar plexus. That discharge is so surmountable of a release in the body that it can create the other side of it, a relaxation. Now, if you come through deep dive and you haven't really met that, I would say come back again, because you've got a lot of charge in your system. And by the way, we have had people come back because they're carrying so much. But let's just say you, and many people do. I mean, it's a 90%. It's amazing how many people come through deep dive and they come to the other side of rest and relaxation. What happens then? What happens then is you make informed decisions from a relaxed place. You feel more connected to who you are and what it is you need. You're making also better choices. You're also getting clarity and direction in what it is actually you want in your life or in your business or who you're working with. So everything starts to feel more connected to who you are that you maybe originally split off from or disconnected from, your wildness, your playfulness, your power, whatever it is. And now that is more embodied. And that's the difference between reading a book or doing some sort of psychoanalyst therapy, is when you start to bring it into the body and of course into feelings, you feel embodied. You feel like you're embodying freedom. It's not a concept, right? You feel you embody expansion. You feel you embody this inner strength. It's not just an idea in the head. And I can tell people about that on a train or plane or wherever, but until they come and have that direct experience, it's just some, intellectual conversation we're having. And the wow happens through the entire body. And I have to be very honest with you guys that I'm a heart-led leader. I work through the heart, but that's because I found that so much. Once we get through the body, we go to feelings. Something much bigger starts to happen. That deeper sense of trust starts to come because we can lean more towards the unknown, which is the opposite of I need to have everything in control.
Can I ask you, Rupda, and I don't even know, there's a question in here, but it's more of a reflection, so to say. A key driver for many of the things I do with EVC, the long form content conversations where we end up talking about life and so on, the treks we're doing now, where we're walking across mountains instead of going to tech conferences, speaking over loud house music, the deep work retreats like this, they all, a lot of them come from the experience that in the first years of building UVC and going to tech conferences, realizing the most powerful moments of these conferences were always the wee hours in the night over a beer with one or two others. And every single time the conversation falls on managing your relationship and your role as a parent. And that is really something I see everyone struggling with in our industry, because we travel a lot. There's a lot of deadlines. You can work you can work 90% of your waking hours, because there's always someone who needs an extra hand. There's always more money to be raised. There's always founders that are struggling with some sort of emergency situation. So it's very, very easy to down prioritize or neglect your spouse and your children. And that is something that I'm feeling everyone, once you dig a bit deep, start talking about. And then now is why I said I don't know what the question is, but but here's the story. What is your reaction, Rupda?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because that you have your professional life, and then what sometimes the cost of that is your personal life. And young and inspired and filled with zest for the business, we forget that the personal life, how important it is. And then, of course, until we hit a wall or a burnout or a depression or something, and then we go, holy crap, I've been so disconnected, from that, as well as yourself, yeah? And that inclusivity is really important along the way. It's so important that I often refer to it as a resource for people, especially if you don't use that partner, if you don't have a healthy relationship with your partner, it won't feel like a resource. And how do we get a healthy relationship with our partner is by continuously, keeping that connection alive, keeping that flame alive. How do we keep the flame alive? By having conversations, by making time for conversations, by making priority in the relationship. In that word priority is a big one. Is big, big, big in the founder's world, and you guys know it. And you need to decide what are your personal priorities, because if you abandon that part of your life, you will feel, again, isolated and alone. And it might not happen in the beginning when you're celebrating your wins along the way, which is great. It's beautiful. But if you disconnect from the personal priorities, you will start to feel the desolation and the loneliness. And then I would also consider that relationship to self being equally important, the priority of self, which is what we work with, right, in the deep dive. And so if you don't have a healthy relationship with yourself, you're not also going to have a healthy relationship with your family members and also the teams that you lead, because then you don't really know thyself. You don't know how to kind of pace yourself and how to weather storms within yourself, and you're probably going to, not be great at doing it outwardly. Everything that is unresolved inside of you, that is not repaired inside of you, will show up in the field, in the personal space as well as the professional space. It's going to show up in your communication styles, your behaviors, your personality, the patterns that you adopt. So cleaning up your internal house, doing your inner homework is paramount to having a healthy work-life balance, but starting with you. And then your priority, of course, if you have kids, is a big one. You need to have that conversation with self, what that means to you, because if you end up at the top of that pile of heap, success with all the gold falling down, but you can't enjoy moments with your kid because you've disconnected from feelings, so you can't have the true joy with the child and play, then I'm not sure what your definition of success is. I would question.
I think like two reactions to this. One, often we need a big event, like, death of someone close in the family, or to really shake us awake, Because at the end of the day, it's just the basic knowledge of like, we're here for this instant, right? It's very short. We're here. Better fucking use the time we have and better fucking enjoy it, right? To your point, what's the point of building 2, 3, 4 companies successfully, like, and being very known and all of it if you don't fucking enjoy it? What is the point? So that part is so important. And what Andreas said, and I feel that's also a very interesting angle here about relating, because Andreas mentioned the tech conferences where you have engagements that are often quite transactional, and then oftentimes the real connections happen after, when you sit together with someone and talk about private things, right? And that's where deeper connection happens, because then it becomes more real. Now we're not talking about, look how great my business is, but we're talking about, hey, I'm actually struggling, right? So it's also about vulnerability. And that's also, Andreas mentions, like more and more events you see also in the industry are now more focused on an experience of relating outside of the work bubble, right? Going to nature, Andreas, to your point of doing a hike, But I think what we're doing together with this retreat is really taking relating to a whole another level. We've touched on this already, but I think it is still incredible how within just 4 days, you feel more love for a stranger that you may have felt for a very good friend. It's insane how quickly you are relating, just because it's so real, right? And I want to touch a bit on what you mentioned multiple times now, the group work versus the one-on-one work, because I think it is really fundamental and something I didn't quite understand that deeply before I really got into it, because there's so many different benefits here. One is that, like, just how much you're relating with the people in your group over that time, and how much love and connection you feel, but also just the really basic stuff. Like, you have a problem and you feel very alone with your problem. And then you realize, the problems are so similar every single time, then you hear it and you realize, "Oh, I'm not alone. We're all in it together." Everybody struggles on some level with their relationship. Everybody struggles on some level with their family. Everybody struggles on some level with their business. And, the universal themes. And then we have all the sub themes, and so much you recognize of everybody who's sharing something, you see yourself. And what that does is quite incredible. And on top of it, you mentioned this as well, it's just the energy in a group, where emotions get amplified, right? When it's sadness, you feel it. So you're seeing someone like getting into grief, and the whole group is like, so you feel it in your body. So the process of the other person really is your own process, right? It's incredible how that works and how powerful that is.
The thing that I often say in deep dive, and you guys know, of course, is that what we're doing is nothing really new in the sense of coming in a circle, because people get a bit shaky. Like the guy yesterday wants to come to deep dive, but he doesn't know how to share his feelings. He said, "I'm an introvert. I'm not sure if I'm into coming and sitting in a circle with people and sharing my feelings. I'm not sure that really speaks to me." And I totally get the mind going into that, kind of corridor of belief and going, "Holy crap, I don't know if this is for me," And I do want to remind everyone listening that your ancestors for thousands of years have been sitting in a circle sharing, around what we call in Australia Aboriginal TV, that fire of, and sharing their woes, their wins, their tears, their laughter, their song, their joys, their defeats, and all sorts of things, so that it's really wired in all of us to be together. We've learned in Western culture to sort of isolate the way that we do things, or the way that we feel, and the way that we engage with life around us. We've learned to kind of fiercely be independent, but that has been at the price of disconnection and loneliness, and that seeking for support. And sadly, it is, we've paid a big cost for that. The beauty in this work, of course, is that when we come back into this space again, which is anyway in your DNA, that even if there's resistance and the mind is really strong, I'm working very strong minds, powerful people coming in from all sorts of businesses going, "Yeah, okay, all right, well, let me see your stuff, man. Let me see if you can really crack me," and that I'm getting all of it, and it isn't the responsibility doesn't land on one person. The moment they walk into that space, it becomes a collective. Yeah. So the work is very powerful in that regard because it's a collective. This is the part that I feel kind of transcends any one-on-one therapy. That even though I love the one-on-one therapy, I see its place, and absolutely, but I see what happens in the collective, and I see how in real time people show up authentically. People want authenticity. People want real. People want to see that you can really show up, and by doing so, they feel in themselves like, wow, if they can do it, I can do it. It's like, takes courage. Huh? That's why I say not everybody is ready for deep dive. You have to really be brave to really want to kind of go to those places that you've shut down, withdrawn from, or disconnected from, or your negative self-beliefs. You have to be willing to go there, but the outcome is transformative in numbers more than in the singularity.
So I know we're running out of time, right? There's so many areas I actually would have loved to further go into. I say this all the time that I think the open work, which is a part, just one small part of the deep dive that you do, is absolute magic. I think what happens there every single time is unbelievable, and I'm in awe in how you work, because you have so many different tools. But I think the beauty about the open work is you work really from your intuition, right, with the unknown. And every single time what happens there, whether it's a constellation of like some deep somatic experience, whatever happens at that moment, I feel is really, really deep magic. But I think instead of going into this, maybe we can go into some very practical elements towards wrapping it up. So more for the audience, like what they can pay attention to, and maybe just to finger point a few things, and then we can just go into very specific tips and how people can experience certain things or work with it, play with it. I think one thing we discussed is to go beyond the stories. I think the element here is we get so stuck in stories. Whatever those stories are, it doesn't really matter. It can be the story about our father or or our partner. So I think that's one element. Maybe where you can briefly talk to again whether there's a lesson there. Another really big one I feel is slow down. You touched on this already, Rupda, but I feel in venture, the startup industry, it's all around pedal to the metal, faster, faster, faster to get there. And that serves a purpose, right? And is great for business. But I feel like on a personal level, what I really had to learn is as much as you accelerate, to do the same, then to hit the brakes really hard to decelerate as well. That in the weekend, the choices you make, whether you go to nature or, even if you're at home, to really slow down, to to take time for yourself, not distract yourself, like that you're busy all the time, to really give your mind, your body like space, So maybe you can talk a bit to slowness and why that is important as well, and any other tips you may have.
Yeah, I'm definitely slowing down is a big one, but it's if you have a very brilliant mind and you've been Speedy Gonzalez and you're, high functioning and running a bunch of businesses, then slowing down might appear to be quite boring and non-productive. So counterintuitive to that part of the brain that says we got to get stuff done, and yet a deregulated, individual running on empty sometimes, to the point of exhaustion will, at the end of the day, what is, productivity, you have to decide, when you feel that you really reached a place and feel that kind of level of, contentment.
But can I say something to this, Rupda? Just because I feel it's really a detail. But when I'm speaking faster and faster and faster, I'm getting really into my story, I'm getting really excited, and you get into this energy, I'm very much here. The moment I really slow down, also in talking, and I really look into your eyes, something else happens, right? And it's such a tiny thing, but you can feel the difference.
Just what I was, absolutely. And this is where I'm going, because I want people to understand that to function from that place, to operate your life from that place, is going to constantly hit burnout phases and disconnect, and also with your family. because you won't be able to really sit at the dinner table and relax and be present. So if you take the dinner table example, whoever's sitting at the dinner table with you, and being able to slow down in how you eat, slow down in your conversations, slow down in your kind of way of looking at each other and taking a moment, a few more beats. You can even do something symbolic, which for some people I get might be a bit cheesy, is to take the left hand where the main artery is connected to your heart and lift it to the chest. And just take a moment, and you can say hello from that place, hi, and you can gaze for a moment, a few more beats. Those things are called connection, and they invite connection, but it's also how you probably were when you first fall in love with someone. Everything feels slowed down. So what you're doing is coming back to connection and slowing down. There's a lot of books on it, I get it, and there's probably a lot of TED Talks on it and video and YouTubes. But it's so important, even how we eat to slow down, everything. And that's why Thich Nhat Hanh does his walking from a very slowed place, and even the steps, I am here. Very simple. That is very helpful. And also the listeners can also write the sentence on a piece of paper if you want to do a little bit of assignment, is who would I be without the story I keep telling myself? And that inquiry, that question, you write that at the top of the page, can really invite who am I outside of the identities and the roles that I play in life, whether it's the boss, the founder, the father, the mother, whatever it is, the person in the community, the brother, the son. Why is that in question has values? Because it invites you to kind of go deeper as who actually am I? Am I connected to self? What do I know about myself? And to kind of dial that radio station to 101 point self and get a sense of self. And the words that I use, sense of self, means sensations. Can I sense my body? Or get a feeling of self, of course, is what am I feeling right now? It's a beautiful question. So using that inquiry question can help you to start to have a felt sense of self. And the more we come in that direction, from outer kind of to inner orientation, from unplugging from that outward, what I love what Andreas does with that wilderness kind of exploration walks, you unplug from the kind of fast-paced world and you plug in. So you go from that doing mode into kind of tuning in mode, listening mode, slowing down mode. And that's when we start to, and it's scary for people because that's when we start to sense our body, notice our breathing, and maybe even feel what we're feeling. And I want to leave your audience with this. If you feel that you're not experiencing some of these things, or this is not for you, I would then say to you, take a moment to have a cup of tea and tune into your body, or maybe you even notice it when you're busy running around, with your next fund or your founder, whatever. And I would suggest to you to listen to the body, because the body never lies, never lies. So whatever your head is saying, the body never lies. And it will always tell you if you're in relaxation or if you're in tension and stress.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Rupda.
Yes, thank you so much, Rupda, and thank you so much for doing this work, and also to you, Mike, for helping get the venture industry more into it. I think it's incredibly important. We've said it before, it's going to be together with this episode as well. We're doing our next retreat in April, I think, very first week or so, 1st to 6th. Am I right, Mike?
Yeah, exactly. 1st to 6th.
Very exciting. Yes. Great.
Yes. In a beautiful place in Italy. There's still a few spots left, so feel free to reach out to either Mike or I or Fred Destin, and we'll follow up with you. Probably best with me, because I have the organization on my side. So if you want to make sure it comes to someone who will catch it, shoot it to me at a@eu.vc, and then we'll follow up. Rupda, Mike, thank you so much for being good friends in the industry and outside of it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Ciao.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.